So how did you get into the study of fragile states? What led to that?
Imagine that in your 20s, you wander, you explore. Everywhere I wandered, I'm reading. I would read a lot. I studied countries. I studied, I don't know, everything from political philosophy, economics. I mean, I just like intellectual and physical wandering. And at one point, I mean, I have an MBA. I started a company in China. I ran a business. So I did all that. And at some point, I said, this is the wrong direction.
Huh.
And I'm like 30 years old. I had learned Japanese. I had learned Chinese. I had started a company. And I decided business is not for me. Then I had the big question, what do I do? And I took some time off. Basically, I don't think I had a choice. I took some time off because I knew this wasn't the right choice. I wanted to sell my business. I came back to America. I had like a year or a year and a half where I'm just thinking. And I think the reason I went to fragile states is because I looked at what I knew and I looked at what interests me and I looked what kept me up at night. And the question that kept me up at night more than anything else was, why do some states work better than others? And the biggest contrast was I moved from Nigeria to Japan. And just think about the societies. Japan is the most cohesive, large country, 120 million people, very cohesive. You can find smaller countries that are more cohesive, but there's nothing on that scale. And here you have Nigeria now with over 200 million, ethnically divided, religiously divided, low-level violence, some places severe violence. Every election, you don't know what's going to happen, loads of corruption. What a contrast. And so that contrast stayed in my head. And the question kept occurring to me, why do some states work better than others? And I would read all the literature and I would say, something is wrong in this literature. It's missing some very important elements. And this is by now, it's 2004, 2005, 2006. And what are people thinking about it, asking questions about it, where after 9/11, the question of fragile states had come up. And that seemed like a very natural way for me to apply my knowledge and try to take a practical turn for my intellectual wandering and do something that interests me, places I enjoyed, but also places which I thought the whole debate about how do we help these countries or how do we nurture a better trajectory for them. I just found it to be very technical and missing the most foundational elements, which is the nature of their relationships, their cohesion, their social dynamics. So I went because of interest. I went because it made sense based on what I knew. But I also went that direction because I thought that the whole discussion around it was quite missing very important details.
Yeah. So what would you say are the biggest insights you've learned from that work on fragile states?
I think the most important thing, which I took that same insight and applied it to the United States when I wrote my current forthcoming book, is this idea that relationships matter. Social dynamics matter. We talk about politics, we talk about economics, we talk about institutions, we talk about elections, but on a very, very foundational level, the nature of how a country works and how successful they are in these various spheres or sectors is all about relationships. Countries that have strong relationships, have strong institutions, they're able to promote better functioning governments. They're able to promote economic development. They're able to be peaceful. And the places that have poor relationships, and we can discuss what that actually means, are much more likely to be conflict prone, much more likely to be underdeveloped, much more likely to be high political risks, and so on and so forth. So for me, you always start when you look at a country and what is the nature of the relationships and the institutions that support or shape those relationships.
No, that's super important. And you say in your book, I mean, obviously the United States is not so much the state, but society that's fragile, right? And I wonder if you see that the increasing fragility of American society might be contributing to the future fragility of the American state.
I mean, ultimately, yes, because what happens in society affects what is going to happen in politics and economics. I think the United States is a country with pretty strong institutions, national institutions, state, the local, state, civil society. So I would say it will take significant time for the country to deteriorate. I mean, this is not Nigeria, this is not Somalia, this is not Syria, Libya, and so on and so forth. But ultimately, when you see the political instability we have, I would say, and
Mm.
we have problems with the government debt, and we have problems with deaths of despair and the amount of pain and suffering we see in society, alienation, mistrust, all of these things must ultimately not end well for the country. It's a question of the degree it would have to reach for it
Yeah.
to have really, really large impact on
Yeah.
the larger picture.
Yeah, you've pointed out, as you did right now, and your book is filled with a number of fairly alarming statistics about the fragility of American society and the signs of decay. How did you decide to focus on the neighborhood as central? What makes neighborhoods so important?
Neighborhoods are important. Well, let's take a step back. When I focus on fragile states, the most important relationships are the relationships at the national level between different groups in society. And so I think if you go to a local community in a fragile state, you often have very strong cohesion, strong families, strong local institutions. What you have is you have no mechanism for different parts of society to cooperate.
Mm.
And therefore, the relationships that matter is between the different parts or segments of society. You come to the United States and you look, and the national institutions seem very vibrant, very thick set of institutions. I mean, you're in Washington, you almost think there's too many institutions. There's so many think tanks. I mean, I can run into a new think tank and someone starting a new think tank. I mean, there must be hundreds, and advocacy and legal and lawsuits and courts and the media. It's such a rich, on a certain level, institutional landscape. But if you look beneath the surface, and you always must look beneath the surface, and you always must start when you analyze a country by going amongst the people. It's very dangerous to understand a country from the capital. It's
Mm.
very dangerous to understand the country from the top down, from just at the elite or top political social leadership level, because that is not a country. Those are elements that are making the news. Those are the phone numbers or the addresses you're going to get if you're asking who do you go meet in that country. But that's not telling you a lot about what actually is going on in the country. Those might be more reflections on what's underneath, but often it could be very divorced. So when I think about America, I want to go and wander the country. I wandered the world. So I took another journey. My journey was a journey into America and wandered around. And I think what you see repeatedly is that you see that a lot of good stuff happens nationally, but there's been a great loss in terms of the local dynamism and the social institutions and the sense of community. And there's a great void actually between the individual and the state. And I think a lot of the problems we see in the country is because of that emptying out or that thinning out, or you might
Mm.
call it a deinstitutionalization of social life.
Mm.
And that's not true everywhere. It's more true in some places than other places. And that's not only a poor rich dichotomy, because some wealthy places, everyone is in their house, nice and comfortable, but they don't know any of their neighbors and they're all socially isolated and they're afraid to show any vulnerability. And so I would just say that I focus on neighborhoods because neighborhoods are the only entry point, the only lens, the only entry point in which I can examine that micro level dynamic and see what is happening in people's lives. And I can compare this neighborhood to that neighborhood, and we
Mm.
can say that neighborhood is thriving. This neighborhood is full of problems. So if we want to understand the micro or the granular level challenges facing relationships in America. And I'm not talking about the intergroup, which is what I think a lot of people in the political science or activist field might talk about because they worry about polarization. If you talk about the relationships as the average American is experiencing them, you have to go to the street level, the household level, the neighborhood level. And so I focus on
Mm.
neighborhoods because that's the easiest, in fact, the only way to go deep and to really understand that what I think is the problem that's upstream from all the other
Mm.
social problems we're having in the country, or the great majority. I hate to say every,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
but everything from drug overdose to problems of social mobility to problems of mistrust and polarization. It all goes back to something has changed in the nature of relationships
In the neighborhood, at the neighborhood
in the
level.
neighborhood. Well, I would say in the home, on
Yeah,
the street, in the neighborhood. The neighborhood is the lens,
yeah,
but when I include that, I would also say something has changed in the house, in the family,
right.
interfamily networks, community, school, community relationships, and even the physical landscape. I mean, if you
Mm.
have foreign eyes, and I have foreign eyes, and you look around America, the landscape is physically built to isolate people. If you really think about it, it's not
Mm.
physically built to bring people together, which was the case for most of human history. It's physically built to everyone has their nice, materially well off little plot of land, and then there's no interaction between anybody else. So it's actually physically designed to
Mm.
isolate people from each other. It's kind of scary when you begin to pay attention.
Yeah, yeah. And you notice, I mean, in one of the most alarming statistics I saw is that two U.S. neighborhoods can differ in life expectancy by as much as 41 years. How does that happen?
I mean, it happens because the social context. I mean, clearly there's a material element. There's no good supermarket down the street. You don't have work, and over there they have much more money. So clearly there is a material element. But for me, I put the material aside and I focus only on the social. And I think the social is much more important. The difference can be is you have a stable home you live in. You could be you have friends in your neighborhood. It could be because you basically have places to walk, you have less pollution. So you have all these elements that are affecting the healthiness of a place. But I think the most important is what we might call the social, I call it the social habitat. If
Hmm.
you're in a place with a really strong social habitat, you're not only going to have friends, you're going to have strong relationships, you're going to have supporting relationships, you're going to feel secure every day, you're going to participate, contribute to, have access to institutions that not only do you have ownership and you're an active member of, but also that it's there to help you, support you. So I think that big difference, a lot of it is explained by the type of social structures, social habitat around you, and how that affects your well-being, and affects your well-being on so many different levels.
Yeah, yeah. Could you contrast, and you've sort of done this at the moment, but if you could contrast a fragile neighborhood with what might be considered a beautiful neighborhood, and I don't mean aesthetically, but relationally, right? What are the ingredients of that kind of a beautiful neighborhood? What is the ideal to which you want to move us to?
I think there's many parts of America that have beautiful neighborhoods, but I can just speak from my own personal experience. When my family moved out of New York City, after I got married, I lived in Brooklyn. We literally spent a couple of years checking out neighborhoods, going south. I knew I had to come to Washington. I didn't know I'd be living in Washington. I didn't know I'd be teaching at Johns Hopkins, but I knew that I'd be doing something in Washington. So I looked south. So I looked in neighborhoods in New Jersey. I looked at two neighborhoods around Philadelphia. My wife and I spent time looking at neighborhoods, and we didn't have a clear idea where we wanted to go. We have some options. So we checked them out, and then somebody recommended my particular neighborhood. And my neighborhood, I would say, is beautiful is a really good term, but the term that I would use, it's joyful.
Hmm.
I mean, I argue in my book that we want to create a country where everyone lives in a flourishing neighborhood. So my neighborhood is flourishing, but the feeling I get when I walk down the street in my neighborhood is a feeling of joy. It's a feeling of joy because There's lots of kids. The kids are on the street. It's a feeling of joy because I can look in the homes of my neighbors and I know who lives there. I know something about them. I feel like I belong in this place because I live at 910. So I can tell you 900 is rental. So I don't
Mm.
actually 910 on my street. 900 is rental. So I know who lives there, don't know them so well. 901, my wife knows. 903 is the person who's easily the most generous, giving in terms of helping individuals who are lonely. She goes around every week and visits people who live alone and the
Mm.
elderly. She just does her own initiative and she starts up lots of things. 905, the guy's really funny. You could do without some of his jokes, but he's very funny. 907, whatever. The point is, and I could talk about the neighbor right next to us who's got 3 kids and plays with my kids because we share a backyard and they're using my stuff and I'm using their stuff. And my kids are always in their home when they're bored with us. So I could just go and say, but I could do that on the other street to a certain extent. And I can walk for blocks and every block I know people and my wife would know more. And we know what kids they have. We know what school they go into. My wife could even tell you what's wrong with their kitchen renovation. So the point is, what is a joyful neighbor? A joyful neighbor is that you know a lot of people, you have a lot of relationships. I go to a synagogue in my neighborhood, but I have restaurants I go here. I have people who I can just greet on the street. So there's a couple of parks where my kids can regularly go to. My daughter, who's the oldest, she's 11, she wants to go and walk to friends from school, she can go and walk to friends from school. Probably 2/3 of her classmates are within 20, 25 minutes walking. So a joyful, what you might call a beautiful neighborhood is a neighborhood where you know lots of people, where you feel that you have a stake in the neighborhood, where you want to pick up the trash when you see it on the road, when you have institutions you're volunteering for, and you have restaurants or supermarkets you're going to, and I can't go to a restaurant and not see faces that I know. I may not say hi every time, but I will go meet someone for coffee, and we will never be an hour in that place without somebody stopping by and saying hello. A real neighborhood in terms of what this is how life used to be for everybody. It's only in the last 60 years that we've created a landscape that basically prevents this from happening. But a joyful neighborhood that for me is beautiful is something to do with the relationships, something to do with the places I can go and meet people, something to do with the fact that there's lots of kids and the kids are in the parks and all these things. Again, it's all about
Mm.
some sort of social vitality, some sort of, I think, ownership and belonging to the place, that this is my home and I know other people who live in my home or my little society here. That to me creates joy. It creates satisfaction. It creates a sense of security. And I feel that most Americans don't have that. And I'll just say one more thing, because the neighborhood is very rich in local institutions. I mentioned religious. I mentioned like restaurants and some shopping, which are owned by people more or less in the neighborhood. But we also have like some sort of associations that help poor people in my neighborhood, just in our neighborhood. We have civic associations that come around and talk about planning. One of the traffic lights I know was a real pain in the neck, the way it was organized. People petitioned. I have a neighbor who's on the security, whatever the security committee of the county. So the point is, we have all these institutions, we have all this engagement with the rest of society, but all through the lens of our neighborhood. So it works on so many levels that this is a very socially vital place. And that is beautiful. At least the term I want to use is joyful.
Yeah, yeah, fantastic, fantastic. I think that characterizes the neighborhood I live in too, and it's not a common experience for a lot of Americans, right?
Not a common experience. It might be a common experience for people around the world,
Mm,
but
mm.
not in the United States. And I don't think in most of the developed world today at all, actually. But the
Yeah,
United States is an extreme version. But yes, if you have that, you just know that you feel something more secure and more happy about your daily life because you just feel you're a part of something. And if you need something, I'll give it one more example. I can recall there was a time when my oldest dropped her younger brother and dropped him on the cement on the chin, and he was bleeding on the chin. It sounds pretty awful. My wife, who's very good in emergencies, picked him up and took off down the street without ever telling the two of us, because I have a third child, but not then. And he was very small, that took off, and we just left us, and we had no idea where she went. And she came back a half an hour later. Where did she go? She knew the house with the closest nurse. And in
Mm.
fact, for various reasons, we could identify houses with 7 or 8 nurses or doctors in our neighborhood. So she went like 3 blocks away. There was a nurse and immediately wanted to have him checked out and told what to do. So imagine, can the people who are listening to this or watching this, are you able to say that if you have an emergency, you know where to run in your neighborhood to get help? If you live in a thriving neighborhood, the answer should be yes.
Beauty at Work is brought to you by Templeton Religion Trust. If you enjoyed this clip, go check out the full episode. And please take a moment to subscribe and leave us a review. It really helps get the word out about the show. Thanks, and see you next time.